I've been growing palms here in Georgia for more than 30 years. So I think at least some of what I'm going to talk about will apply to Kentucky. And so we'll just move on and hopefully everything will work just fine. Yeah, one of the things I like to talk about is just stereotypes about palms. And I hear this sometimes. People say, "Well, I don't want my yard to look like the beach," and I always tell them, don't worry, it won't because you're missing one essential part of the beach, and that's the ocean. So it's not going to look like the beach. Don't worry. And in fact, palms are native to a lot of areas that aren't anywhere close to the beach. You see the two photos here, one of the Baja California desert, and then the one on the right is the foothills of the Himalayas. So palms are native to a lot of areas, and in the southeast, most palms are native to bottomland swamps or flatwoods. So, it's not just the beach, but I think people are correct a lot of times in associating palms with the beach because obviously resorts plant them trying to evoke that sense of a resort. And I know people driving south will eagerly wait for their first palm tree, usually somewhere in Georgia, to let them know that they finally arrived in the South. So anyway, um, so there's another palm stereotype is it looks like a cheap motel, and and of course there's a reason for that stereotype because they were often planted around those little roadside motels before the interstate, and even now. So, but they have a lot more uses, and I think you know a lot of times they were just kind of plopped down around a pool like you see on the in one of the photos, and and of course they can be planted that way, but I think there's a lot of uses that they could be put to that don't necessarily evoke that type of image unless that's what you want. So I'm going to talk about the palms native to Georgia, and in fact, two of those I would be my highest recommendation for Kentucky. And in fact, I think the two that I'm going to highlight are the two I think you could probably grow anywhere in Kentucky, even in the northernmost reaches that border Ohio and Indiana and so forth, those areas that are very, very far north in Kentucky. So the first one is saw palmetto, and that's native to basically the southern part of Georgia. You can see it's on the left, and there's a green form and a silver form. And even though it's probably the most common palm in Georgia, you see acres and acres and acres of it in South Georgia and Florida. It's not the hardiest palm for the South. In fact, it's a little tricky to grow once you get too far away from the coast. It's not as hardy. But where it can be grown, it's a beautiful palm, particularly the silver and blue form. The one on the right, the needle palm, or Rhipidophyllum hystrix, is probably the cold hardiest palm in the world. It can easily withstand 10 degrees below zero without damage, and there are reliable reports of it withstanding as low as minus 20 or even lower. And I have a friend who is originally from St. Louis, and his parents have one, and they've had it for over 30 years in St. Louis, Missouri. I've heard of reports and people growing it in Massachusetts and Pennsylvania. I saw a nice specimen at the Brooklyn Botanical Garden in New York. So it's very well adapted to anywhere that has a nice warm or hot summer, even if the winters are pretty cold. And definitely Kentucky would meet that definition. It doesn't seem to grow well in places like the Pacific Northwest and the UK simply because their summers are just not very warm. But the needle palm is the one I would absolutely recommend for Kentucky anywhere in the state. And as you can see, it's a palm. It doesn't form a large above ground trunk. It will eventually form a short one up to about maybe 3 feet high. But it's very large. It'll get 15 feet in diameter easily. Typically it clusters, so it sets little offsets, and those will eventually become large themselves. So can take up quite a bit of space, and for that reason, it's really well adapted to the middle of the yard, kind of a specimen plant. I wouldn't recommend putting it right next to your house or close to the house, and it doesn't really need to be put close to the house. As I said, it's very cold hardy and 100% reliable. The palm on the left, this sable minor, or the blue stem palmetto, or the dwarf palmetto, is another one that I would recommend really for anywhere in Kentucky. This is a dwarf or essentially trunkless palm. It is native to Georgia up to right about where I live, and a couple places a little farther north. Um, Most common on the coastal plain, but it does extend into the Piedmont region. And it's very, very cold hardy. I would say probably easily zone 7A, and parts of 6B. Again, places that to have warm or hot summers, even if they have cold winters. I have another friend who lives in Cincinnati who is growing sable minor in the ground and does real well with it. The palm on the right, sable palmetto, is also native. We're highlighting native palms right now. It's native to the immediate coast. It really is what I would call a zone 8 palm. It grows well where I live and probably up to about the Atlanta area. Uh, North of that, it becomes a little less reliable. But if you grow a uh, a specimen from a container, it will not form an above ground trunk for a number of years. And I know some people grow it in Tennessee, possibly farther north, um, as long as it's kind of in a protected area. I would consider it a zone 8 palm to be reliable, but there are people in zone 7, 7B that do pretty well with it. So, if you're going to plant palms in the landscape, I would, there are definitely different kinds of landscapes that you can go for. One is what I would call the coastal southeast, a Mediterranean landscape, obviously the beach, and then what I call a Charleston or New Orleans type courtyard. And all these things are, they're distinctive types of landscaping with a different feel, but palms can be incorporated into these landscapes pretty easily. So the first one is the coastal landscape. Um, in some ways, that's probably going to be the hardest to achieve in Kentucky, because a lot of the plants that live there are not obviously not native, but are only marginally hardy there. But the typical plants on the coast are, live oak, longleaf pine, wax myrtle, red bay, saw palmetto, and yaupon holly. All of these plants grow very well in Georgia where I live. And of course, we mix in camellias, azaleas, roses, pittosporum, and any number of perennials and annual plants. But the dominant theme in a coastal landscape is naturalistic. And if you leave it alone, I used to live on the Georgia coast. We lived there about 15 years, and I used to tease my wife that on the coast, there's only two ways that things grow. It either does not grow at all or it takes over. There's no in between. So if you leave your coastal landscape alone, it will be dominated primarily by vines. And probably many of those are native to where you are, like smilax and Japanese honeysuckle, and where I live, kudzu, and it will all just kind of take over and become a tangled mess. Um, but with some care, you can recreate if you use water oaks. Some of the coastal plants I know are adapted to Kentucky, and y'all probably have a much better idea than I do about what would be adaptable to your area. But that's the coastal landscape thing. And here's kind of where I live, and so I live on the very lower Piedmont, about 20 miles from the fall line. And there's my little attempt at a coastal landscape. I don't live on the coast, but you can see the azaleas and sable palmetto, and I've got, cryptomeria, and we've got live oaks growing there. You can't see them in the photo and so forth. The second type is Mediterranean. And this is kind of hard to achieve anywhere on the Georgia coast, but it's also kind of hard to achieve anywhere in the South because our climate is so different. A Mediterranean climate is kind of rainy and cool in the winter, and then bone dry in the summer with low humidity. Well, it couldn't be any different here. We have rainy winters, but we also have very, very hot and humid summers. So it's kind of the opposite. And so a lot of Mediterranean plants struggle, but you can do it but it's more about plant placement than it is about the specific types of plants. And now the beach, of course, is dominated by sand, sunlight, water. I think most people are, if they're trying to achieve a beach landscape in Kentucky or where I live, they're going to gravitate to a pool landscape. So you're going to be looking for water, color, and lots of sun. So here's a landscape not far from where I live that kind of goes for uh, that beach type. Obviously, you don't see the Gulf of whatever it is anymore, the Gulf, any behind it, but you do see the pool, so you have the water view, and you have different palms. And what you can see if you look at the photo, I don't know if my cursor's showing up, but there's a dwarf palmetto right there, and another one over here, and then you have some windmill palms and some sable palmetto, another dwarf palmetto, and all of these mixed together to create that feel of the beach and feeling of a resort. But again, you don't see just a couple of things just plopped around. What you see is depth and lots of different diverse plantings that don't rely on just one type of plant to carry it. Another view of North Augusta. These are some friends of mine that unfortunately they sold their house recently, but it was just an amazing place. And then the fourth one is what I would call a courtyard or a formal planting. And Kelly and I were talking earlier, but a friend of mine who lived in Chattanooga did some planting at Bonnie Oaks in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and he kind of went for a courtyard where you rely on the formal structure of the building and and kind of play off of that. And it's a little more challenging for palms because most palms just don't lend themselves. They're not, you can't clip them like you would a boxwood, but you can use the palms as kind of a foil for more formal type of plants, typically with smaller leaves. So again, I'm doing this for Georgia, so some of these I'm not gonna highlight as much. So again, the cabbage palm, I'm not gonna say is a good one for Kentucky. You probably could grow it in a very, very protected area, like on the south side of a brick wall or something like that. But I think that'd probably be the limit of what you could do with it. Pindo palm would not, I'm just going through these. Um, that's not really hardy where you are, and not that not hardy. Windmill palm is one I think you could be successful with. Here's some in Greensboro, where I live, Greensboro, Georgia, that I planted some 20 years ago. Uh, in Kentucky, you would have to plant them in a favorable microclimate. But if you could do that, they are probably one of the few actual trunking palms that you could grow that would do well and be a nice specimen palm. I do know people in Tennessee who are growing them successfully as far north as Nashville and Knoxville, places like that. So it probably can be done in Kentucky in a good area. Definitely not Washingtonia or day palms, unfortunately, and not Queen. Now here's the dwarf, another view of the dwarf palmetto. This is one I would wholeheartedly recommend again. They're extremely cold hardy. This is a form that's native to where I live that I planted at a botanical garden in Savannah. And this is kind of a typical form for that palm where you see it has basically no trunk, but it grows, it's about 6 feet high overall and carries, this one's carrying about 20 leaves. What's nice about dwarf palmetto, other than the fact they're evergreen in the winter, so they'll really stand out, is they have these kind of silvery blue green leaves that are just excellent with things that are either deciduous and kind of bare in the wintertime or are just green and evergreen because they make a really nice dramatic mirror for those or kind of a foil for those typical green plants or something that's really bare. They grow in bottomland swamps. So in the wintertime, they're growing in areas where the trees have absolutely no leaves on them. And it just looks, if you ever driven through a bottomland swamp anywhere from Kentucky to Florida, you know what they look like. They can be bald cypress or tupelo or maple or whatever, completely bare in the winter. And then these palms just stand out. They're just dramatic. The European fan palm is one from the Mediterranean and northern Africa, but I would not recommend it for Kentucky. This is the other palm. This is the palm that I would absolutely recommend, bar none. This specimen's at the State Botanical Garden in Athens, Georgia. And they've got it planted in an area where that looks a lot like its native habitat. So this doesn't obviously doesn't look like the beach, and that's not where they grow. They grow in bottomland uh, uh, riparian habitats. So, and it's as I put up there, it's at least hardy to minus 10. I don't think there'd be any problem below that, and occasionally even lower. But as I said already, it gets pretty tall. You can see how big. It's a little harder to tell when there's no one in the photo, but this palm is about 10 feet high and easily as wide, or if not a little wider. Kamidori is not hardy to Kentucky, barely hardy where I live. And if you like camellias, I don't know. Well, I get a lot of where I when I do talks in Georgia, people here love camellias, so they're always asking me, like, well, what can I plant with camellias? They pair well, I think, with them. I would say the very best palm to pair with them is the dwarf palmetto because of that color contrast. And my sister lives in Clarksville, Tennessee, which is right over the line from Hopkinsville, and she does grow camellias. I know they're limited to the types you can grow and when they bloom, but where we live is we're kind of in camellia country, so people always ask me.
Somebody had asked if they were in St. Louis, did the palms grow outside in the landscape or were they in a container or a pot?
What I'm recommending today, or what I'm talking about today, is planting in the landscape.
Oh,
So the two palms that I would recommend for the landscape would be the dwarf palmetto, sable minor, and the needle palm, Rhipidophyllum hystrix. In a container, if I were going to grow in a container something I could bring back in, I would
mhm.
probably plant the European fan palm, which does form a trunk, and it can live in a container for a long time, or the windmill palm. And the windmill palm does great in a container as well. And both of those are trunking palms. You just would need to be able to have a place, obviously, where you could put them on those cold nights, And
Mhm.
in a container, they're much more susceptible to cold. In the ground, they can handle a lot more cold than they would handle in a container.
Correct. Okay. So the other ones you can like move them into like a cooler house or a room over the coldest part of the winter and then move them back out.
Yeah, and I would,
Warms up a bit.
with palms, you don't really need, they don't really have to be kept, the palms that I've highlighted today
Hmm.
don't need a tropical environment. They really don't. And some of them don't want to be in a tropical environment. So if you have like a garage that doesn't go below freezing, even if
Oh,
it's kind of dim, that would be plenty.
okay.
You don't have to have a like a hot house or anything like that.
Right, right. But and they kind of go like they slow down their growth in the wintertime. I
They
won't say
do.
dormant, but they're like a pine tree that they kind of slow down and do
Right.
their thing and go on.
Yeah, and
Okay.
what you just basically what you want to do is keep the root ball of a container plant above about 25 degrees. And if you can do that, so if your garage, even if your garage is 40 degrees, you're good.
Good. Okay. There was another question. Can you grow most of the recommended palms as an understory, or are they ones that want full sun?
No, in fact, the two palms I'm recommending for Kentucky, the two that we went over, I'm glad somebody asked that question because it's a great one. Um, they are absolutely adaptable to everything from full sun to deep shade, which is you very rarely do you find a plant that can do that. But understand that both of them will grow a lot slower in shade than they will in sun. And they're both adaptable. And in fact, both of them grow in naturally in environments where in the summer I mean, it's deep shade because they grow in deciduous forests.
Mm, okay. And the two recommended palms that you recommended were the needle palm and
Hmm.
the dwarf palmetto.
That's right.
Okay.
Hmm.
Somebody had asked to repeat those. Okay. I
Yep.
was testing my brain.
Good
Let's
job.
let's see. Uh, George had said that sometimes the gardeners in the Midwest bury the container in the landscape, and then pull out the pots before it gets cold.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What are your favorite botanical gardens to go see palms?
Well, okay. That's close to Kentucky or just anywhere.
It does not say.
Okay. I would say that if you want to go see palms anywhere in the east, go to Fairchild Tropical Garden and you'll not want to come back home. But if you're on the coast of Georgia, the UGA, the University of Georgia, has a botanical garden in Savannah called the Coastal Georgia Botanical Gardens. Of the Southeastern Palm Society, we have our palm collection there. We have over 200 individual plants of about 30 different species, probably the largest collection north of Florida. And it's a little closer. The State Botanical Garden in Athens is quite good. Plant Delights or Juniper Level Botanical Garden in Raleigh is also excellent. Of course, they have a lot of other plants as well. Those are just some that come to the top, the top of my head as excellent botanical gardens to go to.
Oh, I love juniper uh, level. They're
Yeah, Tony
and
Avon has
their
an
plant,
amazing.
yeah, their plants are great. Okay,
Yeah.
I digress. What is the depth and width of a root system for the dwarf palmetto?
Now the dwarf palmetto it actually does form a trunk. It's just underground.
Oh,
Okay. So a large mature plant will have a trunk, and I'm talking about one in the wild. Okay. In cultivation, they don't do as much, but an old plant in the wild can have a trunk that goes down about 3 feet deep. Now, in cultivation, they don't seem to do that, or if they do, we just haven't been cultivating them long enough to see it happen. But typically, you want to. The nice thing about palm roots is they're not going to buckle concrete. They don't. Their roots are different from. They have adventitious roots like corn, so they're constantly growing new roots that they're about the width of a pencil, but they don't branch and they don't grow like typical tree roots do, where you have to worry about planting them next to concrete or whatever.
oh, that's interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Somebody had asked, can you recommend a source for purchasing palms?
Well, plant delights would be a good one. If you want landscape sized plants, you're probably gonna have to locate a wholesale nursery in Florida.
Mm.
Very few people, there is a nursery in New Bern, North Carolina called Gary's Nursery, and he specializes growing seed grown palms of all the types that we've talked about. Now, New Bern is a long way from Kentucky. Um, and there probably aren't going to be very many nurseries in Kentucky that actually do grow palms. What you're going to find, that's one of the difficulties of doing it, is that most nurserymen uh, or nursery people, they have to be concerned about return on investment, and so you want things that grow fairly quickly that you can sell. And palms are definitely an investment in time. When you plant a palm seed, it takes about 6 weeks to come up, just to emerge. And then to get a salable plant is usually about 2 or 3 years. So most nursery owners just aren't going to put that investment in time. They've got to turn over their inventory faster than that. Gary, however, does and has become very successful at it. What you can do, I'm gonna recommend. There's a guy in Clarksville, um, and I'll email Kelly his contact information, and he periodically goes to New Bern. He has a local nursery there in Clarksville, and he probably would be willing to get whatever anybody was looking for.
Kind of as a personal shopper kind of thing. Okay. Who are the palm experts in cultivation, biology, etc., that you would follow or would recommend?
Um, hmm. That's a good question. I would probably say Dr. Scott Zona is still um, the foremost expert on the genus Sable. He is semi-retired. He lives in Raleigh now. Um, Another expert is a fellow out of Texas. His name is William Goldman, and he has done a lot of work on identifying native palms in Texas. Those are the two I think are have excellent reputations, and I always look forward to reading whatever they have to write.
Oh, good. Do palms serve insects and pollinators or other native wildlife? Or they,
Yes.
okay.
No, especially sable minor, the dwarf palmetto, it has a long when it blooms, it has this long inflorescence, comes out in late April, early May, and it has creamy white blooms. And then in the fall, we'll have black fruit all over it. Okay. Now it will volunteer um, if you let it, but they're easy to just clip off. And if you don't want different seeds, but if you don't want the seeds, but so then they only bloom once per year, but they are definitely pollinators magnets when they bloom. I have a sable palmetto, and same is true uh, with sable minor. In fact, I've got a YouTube video on my YouTube channel where I have a sable minor blooming or dwarf palmetto blooming, and it's just absolutely covered with butterflies, bees, you name it, beetles, everything loves it, and it's a native plant,
Mhm.
so that's good for it's a native southeastern plant. The needle palm is a little different. They think it's a relic of the Ice Age. It has this relatively large fruit. It's about the size of a quarter. And when it's fully ripe, it kind of stinks. If you not like you can't not just walking around, but if you hold it and smell it, it kind of has it does have an odor. And they think that originally its disperser was probably a ground sloth. And then when that megafauna went extinct, so did its main disperser. And so that's why today needle palms have very isolated populations. They're plenty hardy, and if you plant them, the seeds come up, no problem. There just doesn't seem to be a good disperser anymore for the seeds to spread it around. That's the theory anyway, kind of like the avocado.
Oh, okay. And then, so you don't, excuse me, so you don't have any luck growing the Mazzari palm in the southeast,
I
or
would,
that's a different one
yes.
to recommend? Okay.
Yes, it will grow in the southeast. I've got a friend who lives about an hour away from me, has a very large one in Augusta, Georgia. But now the Mazari palm is native to Afghanistan, Iran, Pakistan,
Mhm.
so really desert environments, and it will grow in the southeast as long as you have really good drainage. It seems to be perfectly hardy to cold. What it does fall prey to is root rot from just cold, wet soil, which makes it something of a challenge. It's one of those palms you'll read about. People say, "Oh, it's hardy. It's really, really hardy," and it is really hardy. And but it's not the cold that's a challenge for it here. It's the overall climate, which is not, our climate's just not a lot like Pakistan's.
No, at least not here in Kentucky, it's not.
No, it's not here either. It's a little hypocritical of me to come on here and tell. I'm so reluctant to tell people, well, you can't do this because that's what I heard a lot of that when I first started was, well, you can't grow that, you can't do this, like Dr. Franco's book. And of course, you just have to do. I get it when you're a commercial landscaper, you don't want to put an experiment in the ground, right? I mean, and that's different. But for the homeowner or someone who's interested, I would say go for it. Tony Avent at Plant Delights Nursery always says he doesn't consider a plant not hardy until he's killed it at least 3 times.
Yeah.
And I definitely subscribe to that and have a lot of experience with that. And when I first started growing palms, I mean, nobody was growing palms. And the other thing that I do is I grow citrus here in Middle Georgia. And so on my Etsy shop, I have like one tree of each of a lot of different kinds. I'm not a commercial grower, and I would never attempt to be, but this year I have so many different kinds of fruit available. I put together these little boxes, just mixed boxes, and the response has just been overwhelming. And I'm kind of running out of inventory for that, but I do have an Etsy shop. It's Tom Tropicals on Etsy, and I do stock, stuff that you can mail order, right? I mean, stuff
Yeah.
that's small. But yes, I have a nursery license and my ag person came out and gave me the thumbs up to go ahead and do this, and so I can ship to Kentucky no problem. Uh, but I've just been really kind of overwhelmed by the response to what I've been offering because obviously there's a need for it and a hunger for it, and it's nice to see people. Why not?
Yeah.
Give it a shot.